This is kind of a follow-up to the video on my main channel yesterday, but there's an interesting thing about this story in the New York Times. For those that didn't catch the video, we have this story from the New York Times about someone becoming a radical. That's how the New York Times has framed it. There's a really interesting thing in this story, however. It follows the same narrative that you see all the time from the mainstream media, that YouTube radicalizes people to the far right. And you can see they've got Jimmy Kimmel and Philip DeFranco and some intellectuals from days of old, which makes no sense just because these videos appeared in this individual's channel history. The individual, Caleb Cain, is no one of consequence. See, what they've done here is they found a random person who was not alt-right, claimed they were alt-right, and then showed videos from his history and said, oh no, look, here's what's interesting. If you reframe this story, because the New York Times is doing this, in my opinion, on purpose, it's a story about a guy who was never alt-right, as he says in the story, but a traditional conservative, who was radicalized to the left by YouTube. Interestingly, the narrative they present is inverted, when the story actually says a conservative became left. We have data to back this all up. This is a chart I often show, where you can see that the left gets substantially more views, and there's some nuance I want to clarify, because Hassan Piker had some criticism about, say, Jimmy Kimmel appearing as political left. It's actually really simple. We'll go into greater detail later, but these are channels that recommend into and out of the political sphere, and Jimmy Kimmel is anti-Trump. It doesn't mean he is. There's a lot of channels in here that are barely political, but still will be right, still will be left, simply because you don't like that, simply because Jimmy Kimmel does a lot of, entertainment and comedy, doesn't change the fact that his political content is aligned with the left, though it's not as much, so there's nuance. But let's go here and look at this story. I do have some other updates here. I want to make some clarifications, because I thought it was clear in my video on the main channel, but what you're seeing here, as you slowly scroll down, images start to disappear. And the idea is that as you get pulled into a far-right universe watching thousands of videos, yada, 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 because they're claiming YouTube will radicalize you, which is absolutely, it's fake. There's no data to back this up. Okay, at the very least, the only data we have shows the inverse is true. As you scroll down, eventually you're left with only one image. I was brainwashed. Now, here's what I want to clarify, because I thought it was clear in my main channel video. This is it's random. You get different results every time you scroll down. It's not always the same people. Well, in this instance, it was. Maybe they fixed it because Philip DeFranco complained. Yeah, so I think they may have changed it now, so it's not random anymore. Philip DeFranco was upset because there were several instances where it would only pull up Phil, but I think now they've stopped it. It's only giving me Stefan Molyneux in terms of fringe, radical or whatever, which still presents problems because, I mean, that's still, harming someone's reputation, whatever. I'm not a big fan of Molyneux anyway, so. But what's interesting is that he claims he was pulled into this universe, right? I was brainwashed. This guy Caleb Cain is no one of consequence. In my opinion, based on what this guy's trying to do, I think there's been a wave of people who are former alt-right trying to come out and be like, oh no, and then they just jump on the bandwagon of what the mainstream media is saying, and it's become pretty lucrative. So I'll say this. I find it funny that many people on the left are like, they're alt-right grifters, and then when you quite literally have people who are either former alt-right or claim to be, they're now flipping and saying whatever the left is saying, and now many people on the left are like, oh wow, good for them. It's like, dude, they were grifters then, why wouldn't they be grifters now? So I don't know who this guy is. But my understanding is he started like a YouTube channel specifically about like how he was, de-radicalized from the alt-right. So, and the important thing to point out is like Dave Rubin and Philip DeFranco. Oh, please. But I'm gonna have a follow-up on what's going on with Philip DeFranco, because like clockwork, the activists are absolutely coming for him. So here's what I want to do. Mr. Cain never bought into the far right's most extreme views, like Holocaust denial or the need for an ethno-state. He said, still, far-right ideology bled into his daily life. He began referring to himself as a tradcon. That's not far-right. That means literally traditional conservative, committed to old-fashioned gender norms. Okay. He dated an evangelical Christian woman, and he fought with his liberal friends. And there it is. In this story, near the end, they say that he fell into a far right, whatever. The story's called something like making a YouTube radical. Traditional conservatives are not radicals. He said he never bought into their beliefs. So let's break this down. The narrative of YouTube radicalizing people to the right, according to the New York Times, which they've done over and over again, they keep lying about this. Kevin Roose, the writer of this, did a story where I think it's a very clever framing the way that journalists do this stuff, where he talked to someone from YouTube and said, there's a conversation about how YouTube is doing this. How do you respond to that? And, things like this. And that's fair, too. Journalists should ask about, when people are talking about it. The problem I have is that, for one, I know Kevin personally. I worked with him at Fusion, and I believe his intentions to be malicious. I often say that I don't like to assume intent. This refers to groups I'm not familiar with, but I did work with Kevin Roose, and there are some things behind the scenes that I may or may not publish at some point in the future where I archived chat logs and conversations where I believe he is an activist. He's an activist who puts on a nice button-up shirt, keeps his language very careful, but I believe I know his intentions based on what he explained to me personally. So that's a different circumstance. Whether or not you want to make an assumption, that's just my opinion, having worked with him in the past. So, but I maybe something will come with this. But anyway, the point is, I think he's framing this and omitting information on purpose. Going back to what I mentioned, he did the interview with someone at YouTube. He could have very easily done a few simple searches and actually looked at data to find it's just not true. It's just absolutely not true. And the reason why I think again that his intentions, outside of my personally knowing him, I think his intentions are malicious to a certain degree, is that in the story, this paragraph here explains it all. He found a guy who watched YouTube videos and became a traditional conservative but rejected the most extreme views. Why did he then frame this article as though it's a guy becoming a radical? That's not even an opinion. Like, in what capacity would someone call a traditional conservative a radical? No, traditional conservatives are not radicals. Radical would be the people opposing the tradition, right? You can use radical to describe the far right. That's fine. But if this country is based on a status quo and traditional conservatives fall into that status quo, they are not the radicals. So it's a framing device he's doing. And then he even says near the end, he could have put this in the beginning. And this is a point to be made about the idea of objectivity in journalism. And I think that's fair. But we do know, based on, look, this is one data point. What you're seeing, for those that are listening on the podcast, it's a graph showing the flowing of right to left on YouTube and left to right. And we can see that the right and the center, and I've talked about this before, but bear with me, give way more of their views to the left. So if you're a conservative watching conservative videos, it is more likely conservatives are recommended conservative videos, centrists are recommended centrist videos, and liberals get liberal videos. But the left gives way less recommendations to the center and the right. The right and the center give way more recommendations towards the left. We can clearly see recommendations flow left. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's because the mainstream media content that it's a system that's inadvertent to a certain extent. I don't think YouTube does it on purpose. I think there are some things YouTube is doing on purpose, getting rid of borderline content, which will, be detrimental to many right-wing channels. But I think ultimately what it is Jimmy Kimmel, he'll do a segment that's anti-Trump. Stephen Colbert, anti-Trump. Is all of their content anti-Trump? No, but they make recommendations to political left. So to address briefly Hassan Piker's criticism that Jimmy Kimmel shouldn't be on here, the issue isn't necessarily that Jimmy Kimmel produces the overtly left-wing political content. It's that who he recommends to is going to be either the same sphere of doing jokes against the president or to CNN, The Daily Show, The View, etc. The View is not so bad, honestly. I think a lot of their opinions are bad, but they do try to have, they do have conservatives, whether you like them or not. But let's do this. What I really want to get to is, for one, like clockwork, the New York Times then props up certain left-wing channels that they really like. Now, while I can take issue with, the New York Times framing a traditional conservative as a radical and claiming it's some radicalization process, but then actually flipping the narrative and saying, actually, YouTube de-radicalized him, but he was never radical in the first place. The point is, they invariably recommend people like H-Bomber Guy and ContraPoints. I don't know if H-Bomber Guy is in this, but I do want to stress I have absolutely no issue with H-Bomber Guy and ContraPoints. I actually think they're really, really funny, and I really like their content. I want to make sure that's clear. So my criticism is not at Contra. I actually recommend Contra because you shouldn't just be getting all your news from one place. And Contra does a fantastic job of making entertaining content with salient points, though I disagree on many of them, as I'm sure Contra disagrees with me, as do other channels. But I think ultimately the important thing is good faith versus bad faith content. Certainly the left and the right has their share. But the issue I take is with the New York Times creating an article that is framed as though YouTube forces people to the right, but then absolutely proves YouTube flows to the left. And they have a graph proving this. Okay, where is it? Did I pass it up? Or did they get rid of it? Oh, I think they got rid of it. No. Okay, yeah, it's early in the story. So here we have like his timeline. I guess they show a graphical timeline. I'm not super concerned with that necessarily. What I really want to find is this right here. So take a look at this. Here are a number of political videos Kane watched each month. We can see that he watched right-wing content. Stefan Molyneux, social justice warriors, global warming hoax, etc. If it matters, I don't know exactly where I would fall in the spectrum. I'm considered a centrist channel because I've repeatedly said global warming is a serious crisis and we need government compromise to solve it. I typically refer to SJWs as social justice activists. I try to avoid loaded language. Not a big fan of Stefan Molyneux. No disrespect, just not a big fan. But anyway, the point is, here's what we can actually see. He watched right-wing content. All of a sudden, he started watching the intellectual dark web. Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin. Congratulations, Dave Rubin. You helped de-radicalize this guy. For real. Take a look at this. Early on, we can see it's mostly right-wing content. He does watch some of the purple, which they consider intellectual dark web, but all of a sudden, he starts watching a little bit, less right-wing content, maintaining the intellectual dark web stuff, but more left-wing content. What precipitated his shift into left-wing content? Why, I would have to argue it's the purple line, because the purple line is in the middle. So by watching, I can make this assessment based on what they're actually saying. The timeline shows right-wing content, intellectual dark web content, and then left-wing channels. So what can we say here? Dave Rubin, you beautiful, beautiful genius. You helped de-radicalize this terrible man. I'm being facetious. There's absolutely reasons to criticize Dave. He does a talk show. Some people don't like that it's not adversarial. Don't care. He's a talk show host. It's fine. The point is, they like to smear people like Dave and Philip DeFranco, and in reality, the timeline actually presented by the New York Times shows that in all actuality, the intellectual dark web precipitated the de-radicalization of an individual. Now, of course, I don't think this individual is ever actually a radical because they even said they never bought any of these things and they're just a conservative. What we find here is that the intellectual dark web has converted conservatives into a liberal. Conservatives, you mad? And then they started watching left-wing channels. Bravo, YouTube. Bravo, YouTube. YouTube is a pipeline de-radicalizing people. So why do they keep attacking YouTube? Maybe it's because it's about money, and it's not really about what YouTube does as a business. Because not only do we have more data to prove at an anecdotal level, this individual's history shows how he became left-wing watching these channels, how he de-radicalized himself. And then he made some video where he's like, I am no longer in this, political space or whatever. They show you exactly how it happened. Intellectual dark web to left. And that's exactly what you'd expect to see when we look at the actual data. Why, New York Times, would you frame it that way? Why would you then, involve people in the story about YouTube radicalization? Because it's a framing device and it attacks a political opponent. The data we've had here from this website, and I guess you can't see the URL. I'll put the URL. I show this often. I'll put the URL in the description. We can see that's literally what happens. You watch right-wing videos, you watch centrist videos, you watch left-wing videos. You can absolutely go from right to left. You can absolutely go to from left to right, but look how small the left to right line is. It's like half the size of the right, and the right has half the views of the left. So the left is recommending, so the right is recommending more than twice the amount to the left with only half the views. That is a massive disproportionate shift. Personally, I don't care. Make good arguments, make good content. It's fine. I'm not going to sit here and complain that somebody watched a YouTube video and then became a progressive or a liberal. But of course, that's what they do. It's really annoying and frustrating to me how they keep framing it this way when they don't do the research. This is what, I would absolutely always defer to Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice that which is easily explained by incompetence. And I would point to Kevin Roos in this capacity as well. So Kevin actually sent me a message the other day saying that the New York Times story was random. It's a randomly generated image set. And I said, yes, I said in my video that now it's definitely not random. Now it definitely just makes you look at Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux. But I said, yes, it changes for different people. And I pointed out that Phil DeFranco got different results. And I thought that was clear. I also said in the video, I'm not saying he did this intentionally. It may just be an accident. I'm not saying he's sitting there twirling his mustache, planning all of this. I wanted to make sure that's clear. The reason I think Kevin Roose did it on purpose is because I know him personally, and he said things to me in the past, and I'm like, I know what this guy's all about. I guess he doesn't like that, but I think he's a bad actor, and I think he's done some pretty shady things, especially to get his job with the New York Times, but we won't talk about that. At any rate, this is a rather somewhat still tepid story, but of course the framing is all that really matters. I was brainwashed. The making of a YouTube radical. Based on the timeline he presented, is he saying that this guy is a radical leftist now? Is that the premise of the story? The guy was never alt-right. Why frame it that way? I don't know. Anyway, I could rant on this for a million years, and I probably shouldn't. So I just want to make sure I clarify as it pertains to this graph, which I frequently show. It is not necessarily that every single channel makes left-wing political content or right-wing. Some of these channels are about cryptocurrency and libertarianism. So right-wing doesn't capture exactly what they are. We can see that, the Quartering is considered right-wing, and he's over here. But then we have people like, what's a good person? I don't know who these people are. There's some libertarian channels that don't talk at all about social justice or gaming. Why the Quartering, a gaming channel with gaming commentary, is listed as right-wing? Well, that's an argument to be made. But the researcher, I think, did a decent job of breaking down why there's left and why there's right, why I'm considered centrist, why others are considered left. And if you want to complain that Jimmy Kimmel shouldn't be on the list, that's fine, but Jimmy Kimmel does feed to many political shows, and he does have these jokes on his channel. It's not so much an issue that Jimmy Kimmel produces, political content, insofar as it is that he's in the sphere recommending to these channels. The easiest way to explain it is the next question asked by Hassan Piker was, and if you're not familiar with that guy, he's a Young Turks guy. Why isn't PewDiePie here? You've answered your own question. PewDiePie isn't in here because he doesn't recommend to these channels, okay? This is a recommendation system tracking politics. When I asked the researcher why wasn't PewDiePie in this, he essentially said, I could be wrong, so forgive me, Mark, if I get this wrong, but my understanding was that PewDiePie would be so far away from the group because there's no recommendations going, back to these people. So he can't necessarily shrink the graph and put a dot super far away. In reality, Jimmy Kimmel is right next to the political sphere recommending to Trevor Noah, okay, and MSNBC and CNN, overtly political shows. And Colbert is a political actor. Whether or not his show is overtly political today compared to what the Colbert Report was in the past, sure, we can differentiate the shows, but he often opens with attacking the president, as does Jimmy Kimmel. So yes, he's in the political space. I'll leave it there. I don't know. This is just a rambling rant video because I'm just so sick and tired of this nonsense, and I'm seeing other journalists post it. It's a lie. There's a journalist who posted a quote from the story. Let me see if I can find the quote. There's a spectrum on YouTube between the calm section, the Walter Cronkite, Carl Sagan part, and Crazy Town, where the extreme stuff is. If I'm YouTube and I want you to watch more, I'm always going to steer you toward Crazy Town. Take that quote, take their timeline, and take the data I showed you, and what they're basically saying is that YouTube is radicalizing people to the far left. Think about the people that get propped up by the CEO of YouTube, etc. James Charles. There was a period where most of the top creators, and still technically true, were, identitarian, feminist, or LGBTQ. I don't necessarily want to lump in LGBTQ with the far left, because it's not the same, but there is more of an overlap there than the right. So the point is, YouTube absolutely is pushing people to the left. And there's no question about it. I don't know. Rant over. I don't know what this video was. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys at the next segment, 1 p.m. on this channel. For those on the podcast, it will be beginning soon. I will see you there.